Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocko Selberg, and I co-host the lounge together with Barbara Frontera and Tiani Jones. Today, we welcome Dave Snowden and Simon Wardley back to the Complexity Lounge for a conversation, discussion, and/or rant on the general topic of artificial intelligence. As I'm sure all of you know, Dave is the founder and chief scientific officer at the Cynefin Company, formerly known as Cognitive Edge, and the founder and director of the Center for Applied Complexity. Simon is a former CEO and prolific commentator, known to many of you as the inventor of Wardley Mapping. So Dave, Simon, welcome back to the lounge, and I'll hand it off to Barbara to kick us off.
Thanks, Jocko. Okay, well, I know you two each have some things that bother you about the current discussion about AI. So let's start with that. And we'll start with Simon. Simon, what's bothering you about the current state of AI right now? And if you can bring in complexity, we'd really appreciate it.
Oh, gosh. Right.
Asking a lot. I'm going to mark him out of 10 if he tries to do
Well, I won't. But okay, what bothers me about? Well, okay. Let's start off by when we are talking about AI. We're really talking about large language models, GPTs. I mean, there is an entire field of AI, but basically everything's been ignored, or it's happening, but all the oxygen has been sucked up by large language models, GPTs. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, whilst I use these tools all the time, and they're fantastic in many, many ways, they are fundamentally coherence engines, not truth engines. So they are designed to give you coherent and authoritative arguments because they're trying to be helpful. In fact, they're often guardrailed with self-negation. So basically, they try to assist you, they try to be helpful, so they provide you with a wonderfully coherent story. It just may not be a truthful story. So there are lots of measures that you can take when using them. So I'm going to focus on the operational side, and then we'll get a little bit into the other horrors. And so on the operational side, obviously, if you break down the space that you're actually looking at, it makes it easier for you to review, because one of the things you have to do with the output, whether you like it or not, is you have to review the output. Basically because of this issue of coherence, that it's trying to be helpful when it's not necessarily truthful. You can assume that the output will have flaws of logic and reason. It will have omissions within there. It will have a pretense of knowledge and capability, so they're not very good at describing their limitations. So, but they're useful for a first draft, as long as you assume the first draft is flawed and the reasoning is flawed. They're great if you work on that sort of condition. So what you do is you try and narrow the space down to tools, or small areas you could look at, or you use it for hypothesis where hallucinations don't really matter. In fact, they're actually a benefit. So I find lots of use with them, but I also find lots of horrors, because what happens is people start believing their truth engines. They start becoming convinced by this stuff. And then we start to get into the underpinnings of it, because one of the problems that you've got with large language models, GPTs, is that the tools that we're using are changing. So when if we take something like software development, for example, we're moving away from development environments to use of Copilot. So the tools are changing. The language we use is changing. We're going from deterministic to non-deterministic. So chats. And even the medium is changing. So we're going from a world of code and text, as code as text, to code as images. Now, why does that matter? Well, the problem with tools, language, and medium is those are how you control things like art and reason. So to explain that, think about tools like a printing press, the language, the written word, and the medium as paper. If you control those, you control the art that people generate. Well, that doesn't sound a big deal, except for that art, that narrative, helps influence our beliefs. So to give you an example of that, you all know the story of Robin Hood. Just shake your head if you do. Well, it's all about, the wonderful Sheriff of Nottingham trying to protect us from that evil villain Robin and his murderous thugs who are running around stealing and murdering and committing criminal acts. But of course, that's not how we tell the story, which underpins the belief of, still from the rich to give to the poor. But if you control the tool's languages and medium, then you control that story. And we've used art to do this across societies for decades. Hollywood is an example of this. So for a long time, for centuries even. So what's the problem with large language models? Well, if the tools, medium, and language is controlled by one group, they literally control how you can reason. And in fact, whatever beliefs they embed within the system eventually will become your beliefs as well, which is why several years ago I warned about the dangers of AI creating new theocracies, and this is what we're starting to see. So wonderfully useful tools, fundamentally flawed, and lots of hidden dangers within it. Other than that, great. I suppose that's my few minutes.
Lovely. I will point out that in the chat, Dr. Bloom has mentioned that, in fact, coherence can be a theory of truth.
Oh, so okay.
So we're off to the races now.
Oh, no, that's really interesting because
Dave,
when
you can come in on this as well.
Please come in, Dave, because when we look at the science,
I mean, Jabe's completely right, much as it hurts me to say that in modern philosophy of science, we actually argue you can't say that something is true or false, but you can say that some things are coherent and incoherent.
Okay.
So the easiest way to explain that is evolutionary theory is wrong, but it's coherent to the facts, whereas young Earth creationism is incoherent. So
all right.
Coherence is a really important concept in complexity because it allows you to move forward. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just clarify. When you think about
persuasive, I think you mean, yeah, not coherent.
No. So when you think about the scientific method, there are two pursuits that we have: the pursuit of coherence and the pursuit of truth. First of all, there is no such thing as absolute truth, which is fine. But what we do is we normally have models of the universe, then we'll have some observation, which makes us go, oh, it doesn't quite work. And so we pursue coherent arguments or explanations for why that works. And then we switch back to that sort of mode of experimentation. Is this true or not?
We should come back to that once we get towards the end, because that's a very early 20th century concept of scientific.
Oh, I'd like being told I'm a dinosaur, but please.
It's problematic when you get into quantum mechanics. It's even more problematic when you get to a micro level in theoretical biology, where you have to say this is a pathway which is worth exploring. These pathways are unworth exploring. I think the thing which AI does is it persuades you that incoherent pathways are coherent.
Well, it's
I think that would be one way of saying it. All right.
All right.
So a couple of other things. First of all, we should stop calling it intelligent, and we should stop anthropomorphizing it.
Mm-hmm.
I actually created a series of rules for this, because the minute you anthropomorphize it, you give it authority it doesn't have. Yeah, it's not intelligence; it's a form of inference. So AI can only think inductively. Human beings evolved to reason abductively.
Mm-hmm.
The danger is we could lose abductive capacity if we become over-dependent. So that's worry number one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we all forecast cognitive decline if LLMs took off. None of us realized it would happen in weeks, not years. It does happen really quickly. Yeah. And of course, that means that doesn't get restored. And, loss of capabilities is a big issue on this. Yeah. The other thing is, I think AI doesn't hallucinate, it bullshits. Human beings actually hallucinate. It's a key aspect of our intelligence.
Fair enough.
It comes from art. It comes from art, as you mentioned. The ability to hallucinate is an abductive capability. And machines aren't doing that. They're just bullshitting. They're trying to say something which is persuasive, right? So I think there are a priori issues. Yeah, that anything based on an algorithm based on processing text cannot be intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, human reasoning, the brain is a decision maker of last resort. Most of our reasoning is done by our body or by a social environment. We use pheromones for a large part of our reasoning, which we don't get in a virtual environment. There are sensory data we don't yet understand, we know we use.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly just don't process text in a dominant language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So, for example, in Welsh and Irish and most indigenous cultures, there are no possessive pronouns. So in Welsh, you can't say I own a car. You can only say the car is with me. All right. Now, the minute you move into LLMs, they come to the norm of a normal distribution, right? The Gaussian distribution, and they eliminate subtlety and difference. And if you eliminate subtlety and difference, you actually eliminate evolutionary capability and you eliminate discovery. Yeah. So that's a big issue, right? The other one, there was a filmmaker on Sky the other day who was basically talking about the new films being produced entirely by AI. And he said the problem is, as a director, it's a waste of time because you're not getting human feedback. What's happening is the thing is producing what's worked before. Nobody is saying what might work new the next time. Right? Because that's how it's trained. And he said, normally on a kind of film, everybody, the cameraman, the producers, the makeup artists, I'm getting feedback from all of them, which makes me a better director and produces a work of art. So I think the dumbing down thing is the thing which most worries me, right?
Yeah.
And then if you really want to get scary, and I wrote about this recently, there's a really strong, extreme Protestant tradition which starts in Germany, but it dominates the States, called the Rapture. And the concept is the point is coming in time where the elite will be taken up by God in the Rapture and the world will be saved. And most of the language of the proponents of LLMs is the language of the Rapture. And they're basically saying this will solve the problems of the universe, despite the fact its requirements for energy is destroying the planet faster than it was doing it before. But somehow, magically, this thing will actually rescue us from where we were. And I think the final thing I'd say, but we can go on more, the LLM distraction from proper use of AI is problematic. I mean, I did a lot of work with neural networks using GAs to choose between libraries. There's lots you can do with AI, which is hugely valuable for humans. But reducing it to LLMs, which require huge energy to be trained, and by the way, 55% of the internet is now AI generated. So they're feeding off their own output. Yeah, which is a real problem. All right. So I think the issue is we're anthropomorphizing something which is a partially useful tool. For the last 30 or 40 years, we've dumbed business down to, and if it's not explicit in text, we don't think it's knowledge. So in a sense, for the last 30 years, we've been preparing the ground for LLMs by the rejection of tacit knowledge, the rejection of social interaction in favor of the explicit.
So other than content, reasoning, anthropomorphism, and the creation of an idiocracy, what has the Romans ever done for us? Hey,
look, I'm using DeepSeek a lot, right? DeepSeek I find really useful, and I'm not prepared to put something into something, from Musk or anything like that. But I never use it to generate data or to find data. Because I know if I do that, I'm going to lose discovery capability. What I do is say, look, I've just written this paper. Can you produce a marketing brochure for the average American middle manager? And it's really good at that. Because it knows how to structure something in conventional ways.
Yeah.
So it saved me a lot of time by doing that. And that's fair enough. I've got no problem with that. I don't like writing that way. But if I ever start to use it for primary generation of ideas, boy, you've got a problem. Oh, the other thing is really good, by the way, is constructing satirical limericks in LinkedIn battles. You say, this is a LinkedIn conversation, conduct a satirical limerick in the style of the ancient manner to argue against it. It's really good at that. So
whilst I totally agree, I don't think it's useful for using ideas, creating ideas. There is one area I think it's interesting in is hypotheses. Mostly because I generally find hallucination. You're going to have to wade through or kiss an awful lot of frogs to find a prince in there. I mean, most of it that it generates is just, simple testing will demonstrate it's garbage, but it is quite good at coming up with strange combinations and helping you think in potentially things that you would not have connected to. But be warned, it's going to give you a lot of garbage as well.
It's restricted. I mean, I if I ask it to rewrite a paper for American managers, it comes up with structures I wouldn't have thought of. Yeah. And I did an experiment the other day. I said, look, Dave Snowden has read these 3 books and these 5 articles, and he's written a paper which has come to this sort of conclusion. Write the paper. It was really badly wrong, like really badly, appallingly wrong. When I fed it my actual paper and said, what will be the academic objection to this? It was absolutely spot on.
Okay.
Because, of course, what it's doing is and it's the point you made earlier, it's reinforcing conventional wisdom. Yeah? And, we're in an academic environment at the moment with the tyranny of publication. And AI is going to make that worse, not better.
Totally agree. But what you're doing there is also challenging the output. So one of the terrifying things is where people don't do that. And
which they're increasingly not doing.
I'll go into the world of vibe coding for a second, because about 9 months ago, 10 months ago, I was vibe coding a system. So by vibe coding, for those of you who don't know, it is basically I'm using a large language model to write my code without reviewing the code. So I was building this system.
It's a completely undisciplined approach, but never mind.
Oh, it's madness anyway. So but it's great fun. But and you get a real hit when things work. But nonetheless, so I'm writing specifications, using specifications to drive this system. It was actually a agentic swarm. And one of the things that I did was I thought I'd be smart. I'd get it to build me a testing engine. So it built me a testing engine. And so as I added new functionality to the system, I would say, well, write a test for it. And so it would add it to the testing engine. And then I would run the testing engine. It would tell me if it passed or failed. And then I would give that input back to the swarm and it would help fix the system. And so what I'm doing is I'm building this thing with a specification and a testing engine. I was really excited, really, really, functionally useful. I thought this thing was. And about 6 hours in, I started to get suspicious. And so I broke the rule of vibe coding. I looked at the code. And what I found was, rather than building me a testing engine, it actually built me a simulation of a testing engine. So every test for every function was, in fact, what's the probability of this function failing? And if it fails, what's the likely error message going to be? So the entire system was a simulation of a testing engine, not a testing engine. And so nothing was ever actually being tested. But I'd been hoodwinked by this system for at least 6 hours. It was that
I think
convincing.
we'll see more of that. But it's quite interesting. A lot of the tests, for example, on coding, and we did on standalone programs. Now, when people started to test it on programs in legacy systems, it got it really badly wrong. Right? And most code is going into legacy systems. Human beings have the capacity to understand the implications of things beyond the current rational process. So it's the difference between a greenfield site and a bluefield site. On a greenfield, on a brownfield site, in a greenfield site, you can produce something very quickly because everything is from scratch. But most of the time, we're on brownfield sites where you've got to take account reality and previous experience. That's something human beings have evolved to do. Yeah. I think the other interesting thing, so I just throw something else in, and the key complexity principle is distributed memory. So part of the problem with managing a complex system is memory is distributed into the nodes in the network and can never be fully known, but it actually causes reactions to the system.
Okay.
And one of the fascinating things about humans, and this is Walter Freeman's work, Freeman was a wonderful old man. He had degrees in philosophy from Beijing and from Cambridge, and he was a cognitive neuroscientist. He was a wonderful guy. Spent hours with him over the years. And he actually chained up a bunch of rabbits to test smell. Sorry, neuroscientists do this, yeah? Skulls explode. What he found is there are chemicals in the brains of mammals which break up neuroreceptors, so you never remember anything quite the same way twice. Now, if you talk with evolutionary biologists, say this is critical because it creates a gradient. One of the problems with AI, it has perfect memory. And something with perfect memory actually can't evolve. It doesn't get the mutations which are necessary for change. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff which, I mean, and the trouble is you're dealing with the tech bros, with people who, if they did go to university, they went to study computer studies or economics, not any real science, and they work within a very limited knowledge base.
So we're going to get into the whole world of I can create second life, therefore I can create real life. Real life doesn't work like that. So there was
the money
IBM
invested in that was incredible.
But I just have one thing. I mean, Roman pointed out too as well, and there are a couple of people coming up with things in the Q&A, which is that fundamentally we're talking about the market here, right? I mean, because that's why LLMs have taken over, is because that's where the money is going.
No, it isn't actually. It's
really?
not. No, that's the problem. What LLMs are doing is something which is actually a problem with capitalism, which is to create economic hype bubbles. It's
Right. Well,
called the
that's what
South
I'm saying
Sea
about the
bubble.
market. Yeah.
Now that's not well, the way market economics is meant to work. If you read Adam Smith and you bother to read his stuff on ethics as well, which came before the hidden hand stuff, a market is meant to be based on demand, actually modifying behavior. But what you actually got is the same. Sorry, I'm going to get back to my Marxist past now. One of the problems is you make more money out of owning the means of exchange than you do out of manufacturing. The
Right.
real
And
money is
we're
manipulating money, and that's the problem. LLMs are creating an economic bubble, which when it breaks early next year, which it will break, could actually crash the American economy.
yeah, because we're really talking about financialization here, not all right. I use the term market,
Basically,
but
they're
yeah.
not responding to market demand. They're creating a bubble in which people are falling into what in complexity is a strange attractor. So people are
Okay.
swept up into this attractor in which they have to use LLMs without thinking about whether it's the right or wrong thing to do.
We did the same at Web 1, Web 2.
Yeah.
That same boundary, but this is just with steroids. So underneath this, you've got machine learning and machine cognition, if you want to give them categories. There are various techniques industrializing. They're creating new practices and new needs. So we're going to get genuine, real change coming from this stuff. But at the same time, there's a hell of a bubble that is going on. And this is goes back to financial capital revolution cycles. Carlota Perez's work. You get recorrections in these cycles. I think we're in that stage at the moment. So, Dave, I agree with we're going to get a correction, but there is some real underlying value that is being
It
created. The same with Web 1.0 or Web 2.0
is all right. And
boundary.
when I'm doing work on LLMs in some of the pharmaceutical companies, all right,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of scientific discovery where you're dealing with what is largely a closed system with known data sets,
Mm-hmm.
where you can train the things properly, they're actually quite useful. And I remember sat on a platform in Washington with John Poindexter 25 years ago, and somebody said, "What do you think about artificial intelligence?" And both of us said simultaneously, "Nobody's bothered about the training data sets." In an LLM, the training data, I mean, that's one of the things we developed SenseMaker for, was to create epistemically balanced training data sets. Running algorithms on open data without controlling the training is really stupid, both commercially and everything else. And that's what they're doing. The Chinese, though, they're not fully practicing it, but at least they've got the legal structure in place, which says
Mm-hmm.
you can't sell something unless you declare it's training data.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
we're not thinking, you just think, sorry, I was doing this in a think tank in DC the other day. Just think if the LLM bubble bursts, I think that's 60% of the American economy and all of its growth at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, you get a flight of capital. It's affecting the bond markets because money isn't in the bond markets, it's going into LLM investment, and bond markets control governments worldwide. If that happens and the dollar is no longer the currency of reserve, the American economy can't support its debt. And then you get catastrophic failure beyond what we saw in the 1920s. All right. And the point about the guys doing LLMs is they're actually aware of this. And interestingly, they send their kids to schools which don't use computers. That's fascinating. There are elite schools in the States that do not allow computers, and that's where the pioneers are sending it. They couldn't care less about the collapse of an economy. And I had this debate with, years ago, all right? So I had a debate. I got Peter Thiel, right? So John Poindexter
Mm-hmm.
decided that Peter Thiel and I should have a cooperate because Palantir and SenseMaker were a match made in heaven. So he arranged a dinner at Sweet Georgia Brown's.
Mm-hmm.
My only time I met Peter Thiel, I remember standing up after half an hour and walking out and saying, "You're not immoral, you're amoral, and that's worse."
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is what we got on the technology development platforms at the moment is people they're not being immoral. They actually just don't think morality is an issue. And that's a real problem for humanity when that happens.
So you've opened the door on China. My favorite topic. I
I
can't
thought I
help,
would do.
but you are very,
I'm bringing
very, very,
Brexit in
very
later,
kind.
Simon. I'm holding
Oh,
Brexit
awesome.
towards the
Awesome.
end.
We're going to go
Oh, you mean
full.
this is not going to be controversial at all? Okay,
No,
great.
not at all. So back in the
Simon is a Trotskyite to support Brexit. So we haven't argued about this and all that.
he knows I'm as far away from a Trotskyite. Well, I'm a socialist. So anyway, So if we go back to 2020, China had clearly signaled it was going down an open path. UK, what was it? The AI Safety Summit. We had all those lobbyists turn up saying open, danger, danger, Skynet, whatever. The future is guardrails. So we managed to cut ourselves off from going down this open route. China has set up the legislation so it can go open data as well. And so it can basically say, if you can't show me where the training data comes from, your system can't be used, which messes up most of the US players because many of them have no idea where their training data came from because they didn't even bother to record it. And so at the heart of this is this question of open systems. Because in order to be open, all the symbolic instructions have to be open. And the interesting thing about large language models is the training data is in fact symbolic instructions. It's code. And so that people haven't quite grokked. So what we've got is a whole bunch of systems calling themselves open, which really aren't open. And China is gearing itself up for that game as well. Thoughts?
Well, I'd add to something else. So this is getting onto the politics of it, but one of the debates we're having in some circles at the moment is if America abandons Europe and does not actually respond to an Article 5 violation on NATO. And the current theory is that a Putin invasion, the next Putin invasion will be Eastern Poland. Right? America will not respond to an Article 5 violation on a minor incursion to Poland. That splits Europe from America. What then happens to the Europe-Chinese relationship? Because that could then become quite strong. So we're in one of those periods where the world's power structures are starting to flex.
Yeah.
And the danger is we're jumping into it without thinking about it, and LLMs are accelerating some of the potentially negative aspects of that.
So we have this wonderful debate about sovereignty. And so this takes me back to 2015, DVLA. We mapped out the auto industry and we rolled it forward to 2025. And we realized that one of the critical areas was the growth of intelligent agents and was the simulation models of training those intelligent agents, what we would call training data. And so if we controlled it in the UK, we could determine the rules by which self-driving cars would operate. But if somebody else controls that, then they would determine. And so the problem that you got with large language models is they're basically a non-kinetic form of warfare, a way of a group of people imposing their values onto a wider society. And so I actually quite like Elon Musk for this one thing alone, which is he's honest about it because he says, I don't like the way Grok is responding. I'm going to have it trained so it shares my worldview. So he's not hiding the fact that his views are horrible, but he is imposing his views on Grok. Whereas I don't think we have enough of that discussion about what's going on with the rest of the models. And unfortunately, I've got to say in the UK, there's this idea that sovereignty means the data center is on our soil, which has got absolutely nothing to do with the problem.
And also the money we're spending on data centers, if the AI bubble collapses, they're all going to be sitting around. I mean, the one thing, Indy Johar pointed this out the other day, they are driving at some energy improvements, energy efficiency, the desire to build them. But again, it's this. I think governments are focused. Governments are very focused to fashion at the moment.
Yeah.
So the fashion is AI, and politicians don't have the time to think, and they don't have civil servants anymore who think they've got spads who actually support their ideas. The same is true in America. So everybody's just indiscriminately jumping onto a bandwagon and doing whatever what the Musks and the other Facebooks of this world tell them to do. So there's no human discrimination in that. I guess use a prosaic example. I go walking in the hills, all right? At least once a month, I walk off map and compass. All right. And once a year, I walk without a map and compass on a night navigation course. Because if I don't do that, I will lose the skill. And I will become totally dependent on the GPS. All right. And what we're also seeing with AI is a shift to make people totally dependent on LLMs and totally dependent on the output. And again, that's another form of control. Yeah, because there's a wonderful book. Well, it's a terrible book, but it's got a brilliant first 3 chapters by Neil Stevenson. We don't know Neil. He's a great author. He and I sit on a Singapore panel together, so he's a lot of fun. And he hasn't quite forgiven me for saying this is his worst ever book, with the best 3 chapters he's ever written, but the rest of the book is crap. And it's called Dodging Hell. So it goes on with artificial intelligence. We can live in silicon, which is crap. You can't, all right? Confusion of the container. But his first three chapters argues a future in which only the rich can have their information curated. Everybody else is sold to a religious group or a commercial company. And that three chapters explores that. And actually, that is where we are more or less at the moment. In that, unless you actively do something about it, the information you're fed is controlled by third-party actors and
Yeah.
controlled at scale.
But there's also a level of coming from the working class, my response to any new piece of technology is, how will this be used to further oppress us?
Yeah, which is what's being done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's being done even as we speak. It's being, these things are being implemented in things like probation reports, sentencing guidelines. These are real world consequences for all. I mean, I don't even want to think about what's going to happen to my healthcare.
When has technology ever been democratizing?
But
It's
there's
always
a really
been.
scary thing, Bob. But there is one absolute bloody idiot, I've forgotten his name, who thinks we should all have a digital twin, and the digital twin should vote for us because it would be more objective. But that's my point about the rapture. You've got a whole group of people who religiously believe human beings are incapable, and they're going to write an AI system which will actually do the things which human beings are incapable of doing. It is a form of animism. It's a form of making the AI sacred because they've given up on the idea we can work it out for ourselves.
Right, and they also
theocracy.
use that they're very adept at using that evangelical style language that really taps into
You can blame
various
most
groups.
things on the Reformation if you look back, Barbara.
I blame
where we get
everything on the
concept.
Reformation, Dave. Tiani, you had something that you wanted to bring up at one point.
I think we moved on. Yeah, we can keep going.
It went too fast.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, just we've covered it. Yeah.
But I mean, my question is like it. I mean, so we've seen it being now being used, this technology being used in areas where all of the problems you've brought up have real world consequences for, let's say, someone facing a criminal charge or some sort of healthcare issue here in the US at least. And we're also doing enormous ecological damage because while the data centers will eventually die out, and they are making some strides in, I guess you would call it energy efficiency, they are using enormous amounts of resources right now, if for marshlands and things like that. And so my question to you is, how do you think there's a way back, or at least a way forward that's a little different than what we're doing right now?
Without some type of collapse, there isn't. I mean, we're past the point where we can have a gradual change. I mean, I say the collapse of the LMN market might actually produce some change, right? The one we're all looking for at the moment, sorry, I'm going to get really depressing. Sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, 30 to 50 million people will die on one day. Yeah, because the temperature will go above 58 degrees. And it's no longer an issue of if it will happen, it's when and where. And it's likely to be India or the southern United States or Indonesia. Those are the sort of main areas. One of the things I've been really arguing with people at the moment is government should be getting ready for that, because when it happens, it's a flex point at which we might be able to change people's attitudes. Yeah, but at the moment, nobody's even thinking about that, because the issue is, how do you get people's attitudes to things like climate change to go to a phase shift? And you don't do that where you're delegating things to the Paris Accord, and you don't do it when people aren't affected in their day-to-day lives. But when the point comes where people are affected, can you use that to create a flex? And we should be getting ready for that, but nobody is.
So and I'm going to go back to something you said on healthcare. So one of the things that I do is I will get groups of like 30 to 60 people, and we'll map out an industry from multiple different perspectives. And once we've mapped it out, then we'll often look at investment areas and find where should we invest from the point of view of benefiting society, to where should we invest from the point of view of growing the market. And I've done this about 18 industries. I'm doing space at the moment, and they rarely overlap. extremely rarely does market and social benefit overlap. But we'll come back to that. I just want to talk the healthcare one. I did this with a whole bunch of doctors, nurses, etc., of the healthcare system. And from a social benefit point of view, the main things we should be focused on were patient-reported outcome measures and sharing medical data. We don't actually do patient-reported outcome, except for knee and hip operations in the UK. That's about it. From a market perspective, it's all preventive healthcare and use of AI. So the interesting thing is we don't actually have a healthcare system. We have sick care systems. So we don't do patient-reported outcome measures. We do ClinROs, clinician-reported outcomes. So our entire system is based upon treating symptoms. And so what happens is people turn up at the hospital, they're sick, the doctor treats them, sends them back into the same environment, which made them sick in the first place. So they'll come back a few weeks later. And we know this goes on all the time. And so you've got basically these AI systems being trained on ClinROs, and we're getting into the world of we call them associate physicians or something. These are non-trained medical people using AI as triage, and AI which is not based upon healthcare, based upon basic fixing symptoms. So our entire focus, I would argue, for healthcare is we're being driven ever towards ClinROs and
to be slightly optimistic, there is actually,
Yeah.
you can see change coming. So I was at the ISPOR conference in Glasgow, and they've never had a complexity person speak before. 2/3 of the stalls were about how do I understand patient experience, which is what we've been working on for 15 years.
Yeah.
And where we've been granting patients the right to interpret their experience quantitatively, so we can use it, for example, to measure placebo effect in drug trials. Now, with the growth in personalized medicine and the costs of medicine, the need to understand patient experience is now becoming a commercial factor for pharma companies. So we're now talking with ISPAR about creating a different way of reporting outcomes at scale. And we're also talking in California about capturing stories at street level so we can actually understand the substrate of well-being within a city, which might mean, and this is the commercial thing, we can discharge people from hospital two days earlier in some districts. Whereas in other districts, we have to hold them in for longer because the infrastructure isn't there. So I think the commercial pressures in healthcare are starting to drive a slightly new way of thinking.
Which is good.
Yeah, the danger is government's going for short-term hits. So, for example, when we said we were going to get rid of jury trials last week, you could see he wants an LLM to make those decisions, all right? And again, that's my rapture concept, is LLMs will be more objective than we are. They're not. They convey the worst prejudices of the dominant power groups of society. That isn't objectivity.
Okay, so first of all, the change in healthcare, encouraging to hear this. The work I did was a couple of years ago, so that would be great. But the point about this was there was a very much a disconnect between market benefit and social benefit. So this ties back to Barbara, you were saying about give us a story forward. The problem that we have is the market is based upon exclusion, and that is what it focuses on. But society needs people within society. They need a market, so they need exclusion. Exclusion mean property and therefore trade, but they also want opportunity, and which requires inclusion. And the role of government should be balancing the needs of exclusion and inclusion. So we sometimes shift a little bit to exclusion, not too much, and then hopefully we shift a bit back. But overall, we try and keep a balance between the two. The problem that we've got is severalfold. One, governments have been very much Western governments pushed towards exclusion and towards a market focus. So there's been market capture. Second, these large language models are basically like Ayn Rand. So if you start using them to write policy, Dave mentioned about the Ayn Rand example with large language models. That's definitely what I picked up as well with testing on them. If you start using them to write policy, that's going to drive you ever more to exclusion. Even worse, if you hand it over to the large language model, then it's going to come with all its embedded values, which are very US focused. And we know that from the study of comparison of ChatGPT in humans and societal difference from the US. So we are in danger of basically driving towards a much more laissez-faire neoliberal type system. So your saving grace, Barbara, is somebody else needs to win government.
Well, yes and no, Simon. I'd be more, I'm pessimistic in some ways, but I think the speed of adoption of LLMs means the failure of LLMs is going to increase to the point where the trope switches. So
that
the
would be
case
nice.
is the big consultancies who are now getting sued because they used LLMs. And I've always said, if an LLM makes you more productive, you were doing the wrong thing in the first place. Yeah, because basically they're synthesizing data. So I think the point about LLMs is they can't exercise human reason. They're limited in what they can do. The faster they fail, the more the trope will do because the disillusionment will go away. And I think that's if you get, and it's like the stuff on self-driving cars, all right, where
Yeah.
the accidents and the decisions go down. The human beings pay attention to failure, not success. As long as they're being promised wonderful futures, they'll go along with it.
Yeah.
The sooner those wonderful futures collide with reality and produce errors which get reported, the better. Yeah. So I
As
think there
long
is
as
that aspect to it.
as long as people retain the capability to reason
And that's
about
the
the
worry.
space and haven't lost their critical thinking.
You see, I think we've lost a generation. So the whole evidence is you shouldn't let your kids near a computer screen for more than half an hour a day until they're at least 5.
I
Because
like the Australian, we're going to ban 16-year-olds from using social media. I think that should be
I think
extended to AI
by that
and
time you can't
extended
do
to
it. No,
30-year-olds as
that's too
well.
late. But you can do so. Basically, you trigger an autism gene, you create a dependency.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm getting old now because I remember my parents threw me out on the streets after breakfast. I was allowed to come back for lunch and dinner, but the rest of the time I was meant to survive with whoever I met on the streets or in the fields or the farm, and nobody checked up on us. All right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I had this debate recently because, prescribing antibiotics and steroids to 2-year-olds, I'm not sure that's valid. What we're doing is we're not building resilience into the system in any way whatsoever, right? So we're
So
into
we,
a world in which everything has to be comfortable very quickly, and you
hmm
don't
hmm
grow if you're comfortable.
hmm So we need organic, farm fresh, free range kids then,
No, no,
basically.
we need kids. No, I mean, if I go into the hills, all right, I'm carrying 3
Yeah.
GPS devices, a map, and a
Yeah.
compass, all right, but
Hmm.
most of the time I'm not looking at it. Right, because I'm walking, right? So we're losing that physical interaction. We're losing social interaction.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we know, for example, that the ability to read pheromones is key to trust determination. But there is
Hmm.
some evidence that young people have lower capacity for intuitive decisions on trust because they're less used to physical interaction. So they don't build the patterns of expectation. And
Yeah.
most human intelligence is a learned pattern over years. It's not a program. And I think that's the other thing that people are getting wrong. Our body, the nervous system of our body, the chemical reactions of our brain and our body, and then critically, the stories which surround us as we grow up do an
Hmm.
awful lot of our reasoning for us.
Well, 35 years ago, I used to work in neuroscience, and I talked to colleagues back then about how much we understood the brain, to which the general agreement was about 5%.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I caught up with some of my friends who are still professors in that field, etc. I said, "How are we doing after 35 years?" They said, "We're up to 3%." So the last 35 years, because what has happened is our understanding of what we don't know has vastly exceeded what we actually do know.
There's fascinating things coming out of 2 branches of physics at the moment,
Yeah.
which is arguing that information is a 5th type of matter.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And that actually makes a lot of sense because it would imply information has momentum,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that would explain a lot.
There's been
Um,
some interesting work on information having mass. I remember seeing that some time
yeah,
ago,
that's it.
actually.
So
Yeah,
that's coming out of
that's
constructor
one.
theory and also the new astrophysics stuff and the stuff from Sussex and elsewhere. So I'm reading that stuff at the moment.
Okay, cool.
And that links in with the fact that even that biology has switched from taxonomies to information flows.
Hmm.
If you
Hmm.
look in microbiology. So the information centricity is becoming more important, but it's not text-based information. That's the critical thing.
Yeah.
The fundamental error is to assume that information is text. And that
Hmm.
actually goes back to, if you go back to the Macy conferences, the debates between Bateson and Ashby, because
Hmm.
Ashby is coming off Shannon with data signals. So that's sort of
Hmm.
computer knowledge of information.
Hmm.
Whereas Bateson is arguing for metaphor and abstraction.
Hmm.
And what happened with systems thinking and happened with technology is we went purely down the Ashby route. And actually,
Hmm.
we therefore we've restricted what we see as information to what is written down. And LLMs will always outperform us on written text
Okay.
because it can assimilate more faster. Yeah, but what it can't do, and I still remember this at university. I mean, I was looking through the card index in the library, which is actually quite a good way of finding things you don't expect to find.
Hmm.
And I found an interesting master's thesis by a guy called Joseph Stalin about Tolstoy's What is Art?
Hmm.
Because he was actually quite a bright student. And I wrote an essay on that, which got me an A. So I was quite pleased because nobody had found that paper before.
Right.
So the ability to find things that you don't expect to find is a human capability, but not an AI capability. Yeah, and effectively, we evolved to work in the tails of a Pareto distribution. AI works in the center of a Gaussian distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And reality is normally in the tails. And, we're doing new work. I mean, we've got a big research program next year, by the way, starting off in Vancouver in January. We want to create audit tools for the balance of human and AI reasoning.
Hmm.
But critically, we want to identify, this is a participative program, companies can join it. We want to identify what tasks AI can do better than humans. But if human beings don't do them for a year, they lose judgment.
But I thought AIs could do everything better than humans. Aren't we all losing our jobs, as the common management consultant claim of the day is?
It's the cycle of excuses for companies laying off labor
Yeah, I mean, I was
hilarious.
in a
Quite acceptable to the people involved.
I was in a webinar several months ago in which one of the talks was about, and I quote, the drive to a zero headcount department.
Do you know, we went through this with cloud in
Mhm.
2007 to 2011, roughly. There were lots and lots of articles written about how cloud was going to save you money, how it was going to save energy, and how you could get rid of all your sysadmins. And there was basically a bunch of us. Oh, sorry. Yep.
was buying into that. I mean, something we're doing with one company at the moment that we want to make available as part of the research program is we're saying, look, you think you can replace these people with AI. You may be able to in whole or in part, but you're at high risk if you lay them off if it turns out to be wrong.
Yeah. Well,
So what
the
we're
thing
doing is
is,
discover the things your employees can do which you're not using at the moment program. So what are their skills? What are their undergraduate things? What do they know?
yeah,
So, and then effectively run them in parallel on something novel where they're still available to check the AI and come in.
yeah.
And if you look what we're doing there, we're deliberately playing to the risk element of this. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I had a huge argument with Sam Polizano when I was in IBM. This was about when he thought Fountain Park was the future of AI, and don't talk about IBM and AI. And by the way, invest in Apple. Apple are waiting to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart. That's what Apple do really well, and you can see they're doing it. And he said, we can get rid of middle managers with AI. And I said, where the hell do you think senior managers will come from? And he hadn't thought about it.
Well, part of the problem, so back in 2006, 2008, it was exactly the same repetition of what Dave is saying. And, we're going to get rid of all our sysadmins and all the rest of it. And there was a group of us pointing out, well, you've got some basic things like Jevons paradox, 1865, the coal question. So if you don't know it, they made steam engines more efficient. And so people said, oh, we're going to use less coal, sorry. No, you're going to use more coal because you made steam engines more efficient because you'll find new uses for steam engines. And so this is what happens. It's not about price elasticity. It's about the explosion of what we call the adjacent, unexplored and new activities. And so back in 2008, we could say to people, you average enterprise, 2,000 physical servers, you're going to go to 50,000 virtual servers, explosion of new activity. You don't get a choice, Red Queen effect because you're in competition with others, and you're going to need to manage these ever more complicated environments. So you're going to need the same sysadmins, but with new skill sets so they can deal with, potentially 25 times the load of what they were doing beforehand. And so we had those companies, they got rid of the sysadmins and they hired them all back later as DevOps engineers or SREs. And so you're going to see exactly the same. Software developers are gone. Welcome agentic herders. AI wranglers, machine psychologist, or whatever daft name we come up with for what is basically a software developer with some new skill sets. And we've already had, like, I think it was Klarna said, hey, no more software engineers. That's it. We no need. They're hiring like nobody's business now because of this problem. So we go through these cycles. And in fact, this is not new. 1896, new catechisms of electricity. Electricity was going to wipe out all jobs. We're all going to be mass unemployed. Of course, you'd say to people, you could be a radio operator. They'd go, what's a radio? So that was Nehemiah Hawkins. And then Donald Michaels, roughly 1968, wrote cybernation, the silent conquest. Computing was going to make everybody unemployed by the 1980s. You could say you could be a social media consultant. People would go, what's social media? So it's very easy to see what is getting automated.
Get onto the LLM predictions as well. Daniel's asked quite an interesting question. He
Yeah.
said, how can you shape
Which is-
LLMs so that it makes sense of data? Our entire focus is on creating training data sets. We don't think the algorithms are particularly difficult. So, for example, one of the things we did in Ohio is we got quantitative data from people indexing their own stories, from patients and from medical staff. We could then associate data sets with people who were prematurely discharged and people who weren't. And then we could use that to create AI, to create an anticipatory alert to say, look at this patient more carefully. Now, I think LLMs and AI in general is really good at, if you feed it the right data, at making you pay attention to things you need to pay attention to. If you get it to make the decisions, that's flawed. All right. So the new work we're doing, which is imitating the swarming behavior of bees. So we're currently in plans to run for one German city to consult the entire population over 24 hours through multiple micro iterations at high abstraction to see what patterns are possible. Because if you look at insect swarming, they optimize without a directed intelligence. We're using AI to control the flows, but all the decision nodes are human. And I think we need to start thinking in terms of hybrid systems. AI is very good at flow management, at actually at saying, based on what happened to you before that you told me about, something similar is happening. That's the anticipatory triggers. It's not good at reasoning. It's not intelligence. And we're losing the opportunity to use it for good things by actually wanting it to do what I think actually fundamentally flawed errors.
Einen guten Tag.
Oh, we have a question. I heard a good narg, but that was about it.
Well, we do have many questions here.
Wir essen so in 5 Minuten.
And sorry, I want to emphasize this. I've been involved in AI for 30 years. I got excited by Prolog and, okay, I know I should have used Smalltalk, and I thought I could replace doctors, and I wrote code for it. And I couldn't. And then there were two directions people took. Those of us who had any sense realized we couldn't do it, and we had to think about augmentation. Other people said, give us some more money, we can magically do it for you. Right? And that was a split which happened in the 80s, and that split has carried on since.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, what's really changed is the ability to scrape huge volumes of data and process at high speed. The algorithms haven't changed a huge amount. And the question which still stands is, what's the training data sets? It's the most fundamental issue at AI, is what do you train them on? Yeah?
Totally agree.
And that's what people aren't paying attention. There was a book, the MIT bookshop I regard as the best bookshop on the planet. I came home once and I said, look, they gave me these free bags. And my wife said, well, how much money do you spend on the things which were in the free bags? And I suddenly realized it, right? Brilliant bookshop. But I refused to buy a book there the other day. The title was Correlation is Causation.
Wow.
Oh,
And that is actually, if you go into a lot of the academic papers and the stuff in the background on Silicon Valley, that's what they actually think. If they can only get enough data, correlation will become causation.
Do you think that? Don't you think there are chinks in that armor finally appearing? There are fundamental.
Well, that's my point. They've overpromised and they're breaking, and the money they're
Sure.
consuming is out of what, in compare with all other economic bubbles, LLM is consuming so much money it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, okay, some of the companies spending have got huge cash reserves, but actually they're sucking in other money. And my worry is the bond markets, as I said this earlier, the bond markets now prevent governments doing things they want to do, right? Because if the bond markets are upset, you have to give in. And the bond markets have got less money because of LLM. So the distortion of the capital market system is a real existential problem.
Well, we've got all these wonderful tales of, Oracle investing in OpenAI, or investing in cycles of capital flowing. Well, Michael Burry, didn't he come out recently and basically he's taken a huge short position on two, which was, I think, NVIDIA and also Palantir as well.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, Palantir own most of the NHS data now, which is really worrying.
Well, okay, so we're now going to get back into sovereignty issues.
Yeah.
So there's multiple different issues here. There is one in terms of sovereignty. What do we actually mean by sovereignty within these systems? Which is also connected to the issue of values. So, for example, without access to the training data, which we don't have. So we don't, a large part of the symbolic instructions these are trained with, we have no visibility in. So we don't know how it's trained, how it's been modified, etc. So we don't know the values that are embedded in these systems. So if you use it to vibe code other things, that thing will have embedded values within it. And why does that matter? Well, those values might not be your values. And we know that there is quite significant cultural differences between human and GPT response or chat GPT responses, with the distance from the culture is from the US. So
it's a great possible equalizer here, is that countries without free access to AI and with traditional education may end up with better reasoning humans than the first world countries.
okay,
And
but the counter there
that
would
is
be
actually quite an interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
well, the counter there again goes back to my favorite topic of China, because back in 2018, the Ministry of Education made clear that critical thinking was a core competency. And actually, the AI program, because people say, oh, they're teaching kids to use AI. They are, but it's under the syllabus, which has things like critical thinking as a core competency.
It
So
does,
they're
and if you look at
teaching.
their military strategy, they have humans agents involved in military decisions, whereas the American military strategy is to automate everything.
Humans
I
out of the
think
loop. Yeah.
the Chinese are creating very useful models as to how you actually manage AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in British terms, they can build railways 500 times faster than we can. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't even managed to get one high-speed line yet. They produce one every 4 months or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think they're a model. I think the Chinese thought about governance at the start of the AI revolution. And I think this is one of the failures of Western capitalism, because AI was driven by commercial companies
Yeah.
who had too much cash and had got away with murder ethically for years because they were first
Mm-hmm.
in the field. Yeah, nobody thought about the control mechanism until after they started to do things, by which time it's too late. Because as you say, they don't know where their algorithms are getting data from. They really don't.
So, Barbara, to your question of something positive for the future, the answer is be more like China,
Mm.
which now finally makes sense of Brexit.
No, it doesn't, because
Say more. Say more words.
Simon
We
has
should be more
desperately
like
tried to
China.
justify the huge damage he and other people did to the English economy and the way they broke Europe. But that's another matter. And I actually think it's fascinating. If I teach in Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
there's a fascinating difference between teaching in Latin America and teaching in Anglo-Saxon worlds.
Mm-hmm.
In Anglo-Saxon worlds, if you confuse them in the first 10 minutes, they get all upset and angry and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
In Latin America, they wait for 3 days to see if they understand it at the end, and then they're okay.
Okay.
Now, that's critical reasoning,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one of the things is the temporality of people's ability to understand things.
Mm-hmm.
And AI rewards the fast, limited information cycles which have dominated Anglo-Saxon industry. But you don't see that in Africa, you don't see it in Latin America, you don't see it in China, right? So I think that you don't have just to go to China, you can go to other models. And one of the things
Fair
which really
enough.
irritates me at the moment, I almost got deplatformed the other day for saying this because somebody took it personally. To be fair, they should have. I'm really fed up with people actually basically culturally appropriating indigenous knowledge into some Californian New Age mysticism. Because if
Okay.
you work with indigenous people, they're deeply pragmatic and they're deeply scientific. They just
Mm-hmm.
don't use the same language, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the other areas. It's that ability to understand the world we live in, which we're losing. And remember, a whole bunch of people, actually, this is a singularity bloody nonsense, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so people have heard this before. I was at a conference in California, and somebody asked, said, what did I think of the singularity? And I said, anybody who believes in the singularity, their brain is ossified to the point where for them it may be possible. And nobody told me Kerbal was in the front seat. So that got a bit difficult, all right? But I
Mm-hmm.
stand by the statement, because what the other problem you got, so I'm getting to the religious side, people that are still in a Manichaean and a dualistic concept.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you say in our is a separation of the container from the soul. They actually believe the soul is separate from the body. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, they can create an artificial body to contain the soul. And that's been so wrong in the natural science for so many decades, for so many centuries, it's unbelievable. But that's the model they've got. They think you can separate the soul from the body.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to upload themselves to gain immortality.
That's it. That's the
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I mean,
yes.
to circle back, Dave, what I was really hearing in there was coming back to the question of markets, right? And we've had some back and forth in the chat. When you talk about China, what you're really, in many ways, talking about is purpose and intention in the
Mhm.
development of these things, as opposed to a sort of market-driven approach. And by the way, someone said, "What's something about the purpose of the investment?" The purpose of any investment is to generate a rate of return. That is at the bottom,
Yeah,
and it may be a
well,
longer
let me
term
challenge
rate of
that a bit.
return.
There's an interesting phenomenon. This is an argument, right? The only reason we don't provide free at the source of entry healthcare and education worldwide is we choose to ration it with money.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And that's a choice which has evolved. And ownership of the means of exchange gives you control, which is why the far right are backing crypto, because it gives them something else to own. It's another means of exchange, right?
Hmm.
But what's interesting,
Another means of exclusion.
yeah, by that. But if you're very rich, money loses all meaning. It only means something if you're poor.
Hmm.
So we have got models in which money doesn't have to mean something. And I think that's key because the growth models, which are destroying the planet, we've got to rethink in terms of gifting. We've got to rethink community interaction. I mean, this is the stuff we're doing with getting children as ethnographers worldwide. We need to find things that people can do locally together, which don't require government funding or require smaller amounts of funding. We've got to find ways in which those generate ideas. We've got to find ways in people engage with other people as people, not as units on a balance sheet. And the trouble is, government is now about allocating money against restricted resources. It's not about enabling citizens to engage in their own futures.
Well, it's about growth rather than investment in
Yeah.
social benefit. So
Yeah.
it's all about market growth. And of course, market growth is all about exclusion, whereas if you're focused on the social benefit side, it's often about inclusion as well. So society.
There's a great project we worked on in Liverpool. So I wrote it up on the blog. So it's Liverpool and Everton football fans working together, and Liverpool and Everton football fans do not like each other very much. Yeah. But the slogan is poverty isn't red or blue. And they got fed up with food banks of being like charity. So good middle class people would hand out boxes to them from the church vestry. So what they did is they created a market in Toxteth. You go to the market, you hand in £2, you get £20 in tokens back, and you go around the market and you shop. And you interact with other people. It's an absolutely brilliant project, and they've now replicated that in Glasgow. Now, one of the things I'm passionate about is we need to find ways in which communities can do that sort of thing, become visible, share that knowledge.
Yeah.
And then money flows to things which are working, not to people who say they can make something work. And I think that's one of the key switches we're working on at the moment, is how do you allow small investments at huge scale, and then real investment follows things which work, rather than the people who are good at explaining to politicians they should be given money. And I think that's one of the other switches we need. And AI could be really powerful in that, because as long as we use AI to handle information flows, but we keep humans as the point of judgment, we can do a lot. Yeah, it's that understanding where they work and where they don't, which is key.
Okay. So
Okay.
that's a really interesting architectural question, because whenever building, it doesn't matter whether we're talking a political system or a social system or a technological or economic. I think one of the big architectural questions for our age is basically, where do humans matter in decision making? Because when you look at an environment, some things you're going to outsource, some things, if you're building it, you're going to use a combination of software engineering plus a large language model. Some places you're going to use autonomous agents because they're good enough to do that thing. They've repeated it enough times. Some places you won't care what the output is. You're just prototyping, experimenting. And so you'll use some sort of vibe method where you're not actually looking at the code at all. So that's just building a system as a technological system, but that's true if you're looking at economic systems or any of the other scale, is that question of where do humans matter in the decision-making process?
Yeah.
At that point, I think I bombed the conversation.
Well,
So-
what I want to say right now is Tiani would like to jump in because she wants to bring it back to the language question for a moment, and then, if you guys are
Okay.
up for it, we'll ask for some questions from the audience.
Okay.
Tiani. Go.
Yeah. Well, it took me an hour to warm up. But no, I've been following it and I was taking notes around. I've heard language used multiple times, or what something means, how it's defined, or language that's used to help certain individuals or certain groups understand. So, like Dave, you mentioned tying something to the idea of risk. This group, and I'm with executives, people who run a company, they understand risk, and so then you are able to build a story or an illustration of what they might do based on risk and their understanding of what risk is in their context. And then I've heard, I saw in the chat the difference between whether artificial intelligence is named artificial AI as artificial intelligence, or synthetic is a different word that might be used that might mean something different. And
Or
then I've
machine
seen
intelligence.
this,
Yeah.
right. And then this idea in general about what is intelligence, how do we define it? And it's not just like text. There's like smelling things, pheromone detection, like you mentioned, Dave. So language, how we understand what things are, what things mean. It feels like there's a lot there to unpack that is very much tied with complexity and with this whole topic. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, maybe, and see what other insights you guys have on that.
There's a key, and this is the coherence argument in philosophy of science. We may not be able to define what something is, but we can definitely define what it is not. Right? And the danger is people try and say, oh, you can't say what it is, therefore this must be it. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. So we know that intelligence is not probability algorithms based on text. That's not intelligent, and that can't be intelligent. Calling it intelligent is wrong. Anthropomorphizing it is wrong. Yeah, it's a form of machine processing of text, which could be potentially hugely powerful if it's properly trained and properly managed. Right. So we know that and we know that the other thing we know is that semiotics is key. This is Deakin's work on symbolic species. So the only species we know which have symbolic language are humans, octopi, and orangutans, which is probably why you should stop eating octopus. Right? Because the ability to manipulate symbols in language does seem to be very tightly linked with intelligence, whereas not using symbols actually isn't. And that links in with this concept of art and the role of art as semiotics in human evolution. That allows us to distance ourselves from the materials, so we move into a symbolic space, and then we can be hugely inventive, right? So I think, there is no question that we should stop calling it intelligent. It isn't, right? And we shouldn't actually say it reasons. What it does is it presents information. So it's very good at presenting information from multiple sources. But the role of a decision maker is to look at the information and exercise judgment, not to accept the most probable information space. Okay? Now, again, I'll come back to that. I mean, the work we're doing on safety, for example, if you're in the tails of a Pareto distribution, which is where most people are in medical services most of the time, rules actually don't work. You have to break the rules to get the job done. Because rules imply you can know the right outcome, you can know the situation. In the tails of a Pareto distribution, you don't. Human beings have evolved to make decisions in what are called crews, in role combinations, to make decisions in context at the time based on the information available to them. Now, that's what we're looking at in terms of citizen assembly alternatives, for example. So there's a huge difference between a rule and a process. And algorithms really need rules, whereas people actually don't. You look, all of our stories celebrate rule breakers. We like rule breakers because historically, rule breakers are the ones who change the world. Yeah.
Other people like rules because rules implies, you're going to have people break the rules, and so somebody's going to have to make a choice or judgment over that, which means we get a hierarchy and we have rulers. But
I got a standing ovation at the Welsh Nurses Conference when I said, you guys break the rules, the safety rules, 3 times a day to provide empathetic care to patients. And if you didn't do it, the health service would collapse. But if something goes wrong, you get blamed. All right. And that's the reality. And we found the same in Boeing. Yeah, this is manufacturing. We found exactly the same in Boeing. Yeah, this is complexity. Complexity sits in the tails of a Pareto distribution where you can't work out in advance what is the wrong thing to do. So you have to exercise judgment in context. And human beings evolve over years to exercise that judgment. It isn't trained, it isn't programmed. They evolve to do it. Yeah.
So then what makes me think then is the nature of what what is work? And it's something that I've talked about a lot, and actually with Jabe as well, is that the idea that we work is often looked at so much as just these outputs, this kind the more of like pragmatic action versus the challenging assumptions, the learning that's generated, the time that you might sit and reason and think through something, or the why are we doing it this way, or are we configured to do something?
But that's a very recent phenomenon. That's a phenomenon post 80s, 90s. That's when systems thinking came in. Right. And we moved to an engineering metaphor. From scientific management was actually far more progressive than business process re-engineering because it recognized the role of human judgment. And people grew up in companies, they worked across boundaries, they lived in the same city, they knew people. The social structure enabled judgment in a way that the social structure after the 90s didn't. So it's a comparatively recent problem. Sorry, Simon, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say, so you're thinking about work in terms of input, output, and transformation, yes?
What it means to get together, to make things, to practice, to create, to whatever work. Yeah. Product, services, or
so
whatever.
So it's the output in terms of the functional output of whatever we are building. This is one of the problems that we have with so software engineering. Gosh, okay. When we look at software engineering, sorry to go a bit technical, there are two parts of it. There's development and testing. Testing is actually an engineering subject because it works on a principle of basically we every single test that we build is a small tool for a particular space. And so our testing suites are actually composed of thousands of small tools. So what we do in testing is we build a tool for our context. So if I'm testing electronic healthcare record system, my test suite is not the same if I'm doing an online gambling site. Now we do this in all forms of engineering. So when I'm making soup, I'll use a kitchen blender. If I'm building a deep mine shaft, I'm not going to use a kitchen blender. I'm going to use a mining tool. So we use tools for our context. The one place we don't do that is in software development. Software development, we've been sucked into this idea that we can have standardized tools and they apply everywhere. So in fact, our software development is a craft and testing is an engineering subject. And there are ways of turning our craft into an engineering subject, but it's not. Now, to your point about the inputs and outputs, or to my point about that, one of the problems that we have is when we are crafting software systems, we think about the functionality. But most of the decisions are not actually functional. They're structural. They're within the system itself, which is why most of our specifications and most of our architectural diagrams don't actually reflect the system that's built. What they do is they give a belief, a statement of this is what we wish it to be, not what is actually there. And you see this, we had a group of 7 people building calendar apps. We gave them exactly the same tools, exactly the same architectural diagrams, exactly the same specifications, exactly the same environments. And so these 7 teams built 7 calendar apps, all matched the test, all functionally the same, all architecturally different. So there are lots of issues that we have in terms of software development, in terms of the hidden structure and the choices and the decisions that we made. And that's true not just with software systems. I've seen this in economic systems, social systems as well. So one of the big problems with large language models is when you talk to them and you ask them to build this stuff for you, they are going to be making all those structural decisions about the environment you are going to be completely oblivious to. So you are actually handing over fundamental decision making, which influences your ability to adapt to these machines as well. So, sorry.
I was going to say that's a really important point because I would say architecture, whether it's software architecture or society architecture, although it uses the language of complexity, has never taken on board the implications. So software people generally say, oh, it's complex and emergent, therefore I'm not responsible for what I do. It's a lazy way of thinking about things, right? My favorite example of this is work we did when I was in IBM. So we were bidding for the patient record system, which is the largest ever disaster in government procurement in health sector worldwide, which the British owned the record in, all right? So we should be proud of this, I suppose, all right? And we were on the bid team for IBM, and we took one look at it and said, this is doomed to fail. The guy running it, the guy from ICI, was famous for saying human beings are limited capacity information processing devices. And that's going to go down really well with the medical profession. They thought they could have a secure centralized database with multi-accesses, which is like really stupid. And what they did is they engineered the perfect solution. That's the engineering systems thinking dynamic, which came through from those decades. A complex system would work very differently. What we do is we do an actant interaction mapping. So what are the actants? What are the interactions? So the actants in the health sector in patient records are basically ambulances, doctors, hospitals, etc. And the only interaction is reading and writing to a patient record. So the design we came up with, which IBM refused to put forward, which would have cost 10 million, was what you do is everybody carries their medical records with them, either physical or credit card or implanted chip. And
Gotcha.
I worked with Rory to prove that people would accept implanted chips. And the marketing campaign started off with, you do it for your dog and your cat. Why wouldn't you do it for yourself? So that made the point. And then all you have to do is invest in reader technologies at every point of entry into the existing health service systems.
Oh, I like that.
And what you do is you put that in place, then you see what patterns stabilize. And that's the argument we're also putting into society design. You change the actants in the interactions at large scale, and you see what patterns stabilize, what are called regularities in complexity. And that's where you put further investment. So what you do, and this is constructor theory, you change the substrate of the system, and you wait for the substrate or the affordances to tell you what you can do. But the engineering the problem is governments have locked into this principle that they should design the system. So every time it doesn't work, they redesign it. They haven't realized it's the design process which is making it not work.
So okay, that's fascinating. The reason why is, so most those of you who know me know I like mapping. One of the interesting things about maps, and it doesn't matter whether I'm talking about my maps or geographical maps, what they are is a moment in time. They are a view of an environment at a moment in time. That environment, over a long enough time scale, is a process of emergence. Even with, tectonic plates moving and everything else, there are basic heuristics and other bits and pieces. But if you look over 200 million years, the process is a complex process. But what we see right now for this week and next week and maybe the next year or 2 years or whatever it is a view of what looks like a relatively static environment, but it is just simply a snapshot in time at a moment in a complex space, which of course going forward is going to be even more complex. So when you map, you take like slithers off a space. Now your ability to reason around that space is affected by a number of different things. One is the medium. So there's a world of difference between if you're mapping and it's written in code. If you use the code, you talk about, the syntax, the style, the rules. If you're looking at the map, you'll talk about objects, relationship, context. So the medium matters. That changes the message you have. The language is important as well. And we are seeing changes at the moment, obviously, from deterministic to non-deterministic. And lastly is the tools that you have available. So whether it's this particular way of mapping or whether it's the types of, whether it's a kitchen blender or mining tools, that influences your ability to reason about a space. So I don't think it's just, to Tiani's question, I don't think it's just language that's the issue. I think there are three things which are fundamentally changing at the moment. Medium, because we're moving from text to much more image-based, the language, non-deterministic, and the tool sets itself. So I think you have to think of all three of those. And I think the danger is, of course, those constrain how we reason about a space, which brings us back to the real danger of large language models, is if it's controlled by a small group of people, it's not open, it's not distributed, they get to control how you reason and how you think. There we are, a new priesthood. We should be more like
just what we need.
It's the rapture.
We need
it is the
another one of
rapture,
those.
David. Yes, you're right. It is
God,
the
here we
rapture.
are. We're off to the races. Andrew Cutter made an interesting point in the chat, which is, about the difference between and this has some things to do with the way it's sold and perceived, that the idea that this is somehow modeled on human intelligence and can act as a replacement for human intelligence, as opposed to a
We
complement.
don't even know what human
It isn't.
intelligence
That's
is.
what
So it's not.
yeah.
The designers have only ever lived in an IT environment.
Well, that's the idea here, is that but that is not necessarily how it's being adopted. And I think that's Andrew. Andrew, do you want to unmute yourself and defend your own damn point?
Yeah, I
Can
can
you?
do that.
There he is.
Hey,
So yeah, the basic idea that I was trying to get at is that humanity is getting very caught up on this idea of creating human intelligence or mimicking it. Right? We've always done that from the cotton gin to the printing press to now, right? And we can instead work towards facilitating the genesis of a meaningful collaboration that isn't predicated on a human mind.
hmm
And that's something that I've been trying to push. And I had a question earlier about how you would participate in my shoes on an AI policy of our AI work group for policy and governance, because my city is fortunate enough to be doing that. So I'm
hmm
squeezing that in there too.
I would be cautious, Andrew. So I think the danger is when you say, how do we cooperate, you start to anthropomorphize AI. And there is a strong strand in that. And we need to keep coming back to the fact that AI is making an algorithmic probabilistic determination text that it already possesses. So it's information processing, yeah, which is not the same thing as intelligence or judgment or human reasoning. It's an important support mechanism. So I say we're also really interested in hybrid solutions, but what we're basically saying is every point of judgment has to be human. And actually, human in combinations, we did not evolve to be individual decision makers. We evolved to make decisions in small groups with people occupying different roles. We're really good then, we're really bad as individuals. So managing information with AI, with LLMs, that's goodness. Exercising judgment or reasoning, that's actually wrong. Now, A, it's not doing it, and B, if you do it, you'll dumb us down. Yeah.
So that's a really interesting point on the collaboration. So competition, is derived from com with pater, to strive, to seek. So competition is the act of groups of people seeking or striving for something. And we normally talk about competition in three basic forms. You can either do it by fighting others, so we call that conflict, laboring with others, we call that collaboration, or helping others, cooperation. So when we talk about competition, there's three different basic forms, but all of that competition is about groups of people seeking something. So your question is really, are these large language models in competition with humans? And by competition, we could mean conflict, cooperation, collaboration. That's a really interesting point. We do, as today's point, we are anthropomorphizing it by saying that it is. But if we think of them not as artificial intelligence, think of it as machine cognition, then to some extent, I suppose they are. If I go back to Nicholas Negroponte, wrote a book called Architecture by Yourself, which was based upon the ideas of Jonna Freeman. So this particular paper, Architecture by Yourself, was about the process of design. So what Jonna Freeman said was, design is the process of a conversation occurring between multiple designer perspectives, which may be in the head of one designer or multiple designers. And so the question they were asking back in the 1970s is what happens when one of those designers becomes the machine? And so you would have a conversation with the machine, which would help you design something. And this led to the ideas of conversational programming, which is what we see today. So, yeah. I agree with Dave. We don't want to anthropomorphize these large language models because it is about machine cognition. It is about machine intelligence. They are not human. The reasoning models are fundamentally different, even if you could call it reasoning, because it is a statistical model, and we don't quite understand how humans reason anyway. But we are, to some extent, striving with them to seek things. So we could be in conflict, cooperation, collaboration with them. So yes, don't anthropomorphize. Yes, learn to collaborate and cooperate with them. That would be my take. Does that make sense? Just shake your head if no.
And I think, I mean, I made the point in the chat. One of the things what we've had over the last 50 or 60 years in what I call North Atlantic society, I refuse to call it West and East because it isn't, is a growth of a model which basically says the perfect human being has perfect information, perfect training, perfect competence, and makes perfect decisions.
And doesn't exist, therefore.
And that's been the model. And LLM is picking up on that because we basically say, well, I can't process all the information. I can't make objective decisions. Oh, maybe this magical machine will do it for me. Now, actually, human beings evolved to make decisions in very complex ways with multiple sensory data using humans in different combinations in different circumstances. And we evolved to think abductively. But that Enlightenment model of rationality, just like dualism and the body-soul separation, that is basic in people's day-to-day thinking, and we need to challenge that because that's where LLM goes wrong.
Well, there are many solutions we talk about for those sorts of things. So, for example, one of the classic ones is let's break down the problem into lots of small steps, and then we'll use several large language models.
Reductionist error.
Yeah. We'll use several large language models against each step. And basically, we'll use the Marquis de Condorcet's work from the 1700s or whatever. So if the likelihood of reasoning is slightly more than 50%, if we aggregate against multiple large language models, we'll get the right answer. Which is sort of fair enough, except for the fact that really will only hold with areas with lots of training data, so commonly repeated activities, not novel activities, in which case the error rates can be much, much worse. And so the likelihood of being right much less than 50%. But also, it suffers from the fact that errors in the Marquis de Condorcet's work, the errors are independent. And unfortunately, these systems we can't call independent because they use training data and they probably use the same training data, but we just don't know because that's
the
not
vital
open.
Point you're making, Simon. It's an absolutely critical point. Human beings evolved to make small mistakes and respond to anomalies.
Yeah.
So we don't engage the cognitive aspect of our brain unless there's an anomaly. So, and if you look at it, all human stories are stories of failure, not success. So humans use failure to move progressively forward. They don't see it as failure. They see it as learning, actually, at the micro level. And if you look at apprentice models are set up so you fail in a safe environment. Because that's the way you learn. AI regards failure as a failure. And again, it's coming back to that Enlightenment model, which underpins the way it's programmed, is the assumption is there is a right answer. And coming back to coherence, human beings have learned what matters is there's a right direction of travel, not that there's a right answer. And if you look at morality, we actually are very good at saying what we shouldn't be, and we can get consensus on that very quickly, but we're not very good at agreeing what we should be.
But if we can create a Markov blanket around the problem, then we can capture all the variables necessary to create the right predictive model.
Provoked, all right? Just because we mentioned bloody Friesen and that nonsense up front, do we have to carry on with it?
We made it all this way without this kind of banter. So at this point,
can I take a really quick shot at Andrew's question?
Oh, sure, Dave. Yeah, weigh in.
So, Andrew, one of the things that I would say, similar to what Dave's saying, is that one of the in the polis, when we're talking about politics, science has this way of presenting itself as objective, right? I'm a scientist and I'm going to be objective. That means the scientist has a specific subjectivity that they must perform in a political arena. They have to be objective. The minute they trip over into being subjective, then they discredit their scientific credibility. Their power in politics comes from being a certain kind of subject. The thing I would worry about or play with or think about is what kind of subjectivity would be a subjectivity that would be related to an AI. In the same way, you have objectivity and subjectivity, you're going to have this other kind of subjectivity that is someone who is in relationship with an AI, right? And that's the politics we have to figure out. And part of the reason I'm pointing that out is because we're in a post-science political climate right now, right? Scientists have lost their ability to be subjective in the political realm, and therefore we get things like people saying that like climate change isn't a fucking thing, right? Because the scientists can no longer be purely subjective. They can no longer be purely objective as that type of subject in politics. So the same thing is going to happen with AI. We're going to have to figure out what is it to testify in a public forum about something, either as the AI being the primary person testifying or as someone who's representing the output of an AI. These are the same problems that scientists have had to kind of struggle with for the last 100 or so years. And I would suggest that in politics, the scientists have lost most of their credibility. So any introduction of AI is going to have these same questions about the subjectivity and what needs to be performed in order for it to be a proper political actor. And that's the type of questions I would be thinking about if I were
It
you.
comes back to the complexity issue, though, Jabe, and I think this is the point Simon was making as well. That there was a huge amount that science could be absolutely accurate about, but as the system got more and more complex, there are more possibilities, right? So, and that's where we come back to this actant interaction analysis. The granularity changes the objectivity of what you're doing.
Yep.
So the scientists were trying to argue, and they were coming back to Simon's definition, we will make a prediction, we will be right.
Yep.
Right? Now, that's problematic. So if if you go back to Brexit, every economist, bar one who wasn't really an economist, said it would be an economic disaster. But it's taken the best part of a decade for it to happen, so they couldn't predict when it would happen. It's cost the UK economy 9 billion, right? So the problem is in a complex system, you can't predict exactly what the unintended consequences will be. And therefore, although you can make statements like we are moving in a direction of travel, which is very, very dangerous for the planet, because people were stuck in this 19th century concept of scientific objectivity, they didn't buy it. And I think the other thing people haven't realized, this is again a very key complexity principle, we only respond to things which are proximate. We don't respond to distant threat. Human beings respond to proximate threat. So until climate change becomes proximate at a local level, nobody will have the political will to change it at international level. That's a paradox because the balance could get it wrong. Yeah, we might not have time to change the substrate in order to change the bigger picture.
Yep. I mean, based on the same thing, Latour's take on this, right, is that all of the kind of local scientists come up with predictions about what they can do with their own local economic and environmental stuff. And then they all get together in Paris. And when we add up the outcomes of all of their separate analysis into a whole, you end up having to have like 10 planet Earths to get where but they're all scientifically correct individually. Yeah. They just don't add up.
And actually, we've gone back to Latour in our estuarine mapping heavily. Right, Latour is too neglected. He got very unfashionable in complexity circles for reasons I don't understand.
Yep.
Because he was there before most people, and I think his whole concept of actants is much more successful than process philosophy, which really goes down a bad direction.
Yep.
Okay. I have a question for Dave and Simon and Tiani. Should we take some questions from the floor? Are you guys up for it, or do you want to keep
why
chatting?
I think so.
Okay.
Oh, Dave, do you have a hard stop, by the way?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I've just got to eat at some stage tonight and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but other than that, I'm okay.
Okay, and that doesn't make me feel bad at all. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands because the chat is completely out of control and finding the questions in it is very difficult. So if you have a question that you would like to pose to Dave or Simon or anybody else here that's had something to say, please raise your hand now. What? Really? None of you? Ah, good.
Tom Howard.
Got some
Tom.
coming in. Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Simon, you
And
said earlier.
a brief question, please, Tom.
Yes. You said earlier about how with multiple LLMs that if you get it 50%, then you've got a chance. Otherwise, the errors accumulate.
Except for the fact that the Marquis de Condorcet's work is based upon independent errors. And of course, these large language models have common training sets. So you get a lot of systematic potential for
That's
errors.
a Pareto Gaussian thing. If the way chaos mathematics works, if every agent is independent of everything else, you get statistical patterns. But the minute they connect, it falls
That's
into
when you got problems.
distribution and you get unpredictability.
Yeah.
And if you have a fitness function,
In
to
terms
iterate
of
it over time.
That
To iterate
fitness
over time.
functions, I mean, and that's Kaufman and other work, all right? So fitness landscapes are really interesting because I think they represent what in complexity is called a strange attractor. The trouble is they can destabilize as quickly as they stabilize. And some of our work on terrorism was to how can you predict that the preconditions for destabilization exist so that human beings will pay attention. And that comes back to the use of AI, and that's LLMs are not the best thing on this, to be honest, right? One of the values of AI is to create anticipatory alerts to humans to say, pay attention to this. Yeah.
So the question about using multiple agents in a judgment system, which is perfectly fine, assuming that they have, if individually, each agent is more than 50% likely to get the right answer, it's the Marquis de Condorcet. You aggregate across many, so you get very, very high rates of accurate prediction. But your problem is it depends upon the level of training data, and of course these agents aren't actually independent because they're often trained with the same level, the same training data as well. So that's where it all gets messy, falls apart.
And of course, if the consequence of an event in the tail of a Pareto distribution is massive, the trouble is we eliminate it. I mean, that's a sort of one flood in every 500 years error.
Well, pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, now we got lots of questions.
Yes. Okay. Tom, I assume that was satisfactory. You've gone away. Roman, you've been very busy in the chat. So one question, please.
No, we're stopping Roman in the chat. Excellent.
One question, and it actually was something that I wrote in the chat as well. But I'm curious what Dave and then Simon, you think of it. At one point, is what LLMs that we currently have, are they providing enough value that we can say all the infringements that they did in terms of sucking up all IP, all personal information, all things like that, because they really stepped over boundaries quite a lot. At what point would the actual value that they generate be worth that? What's your personal opinion on that?
I don't think
it ever will be.
Yeah, I don't think we've thought enough. I mean, we are walking into a brave new world here, and we're not thinking enough about that problem. So, in terms of how much do I value the UK having separate values from Peter Thiel or Sam Altman or whoever training these systems? I like the values we have in the UK. I would not like us to all be walking around with a little Ayn Rand on our shoulders, thinking the world, the answer to everything is laissez-faire economics. So, you know, that's incredibly valuable to me. Now you've got to aggregate that over the entire population, because part of the population would be quite happy if the UK became Airstrip 1 or the 51st state or whatever it happens to be. So, God, really tough question.
Vance, who said Peter can have everything up to the English Channel, was a statement by Vance.
So, was it worth it in order to make pretty images and get the wrong answers to things and get diets that, if you follow, will put you in hospital because and we're getting that's actually happening.
There is one good news thing, though, Simon. It's actually starting to break trust in the internet. So it's almost like there's a whole generation. But if it's on the internet, it's probably not true anyway, and that actually could be quite positive.
I totally agree if it was a case of that people would realize it was wrong. What terrifies me is that people believe the AI is wrong in reality.
People are getting
The AI is
savvy.
right and reality is wrong. Sorry. Yep.
So at the weekend, we had a South African rugby player, basically eye gouged a Welsh player.
Hmm.
Within an hour, South African fans were putting out a photograph which said a Welsh player had eye gouged him, but the thumbs were wrong.
Right.
Right? And people spotted that really quickly. So I think there's a degree to which people are canny. So if the abuse gets to such a level that actually it's more often wrong than it's right,
Yeah.
that's the flip over at which actually we might get people back into valid. So I checked that some people are saying, well, I don't believe it until I see it in the Guardian or the Wall Street Journal or something like that. So it's almost like journalism is coming back in because people can't trust the internet.
Oh, that would be lovely to see. I mean, I
Well, I have
occasionally,
hopes, yeah.
well, you're very hopeful. Occasionally, I go onto Twitter and the horror. I usually leave pretty
I
quickly.
used to love Twitter.
I so did
love
I. It was
Twitter.
wonderful.
I assume we're talking about X here.
Oh, sorry, X. Yeah, that place, the beer hall, the
Yeah.
beer hall that was formerly known as Twitter. Yes.
All right, I just thought I'd throw that in to keep things moving. Roman, was that good? Yeah? You happy? Okay, Alex, you're next up.
Thank you all. So yeah, speaking of Peter Thiel and his community,
Could we not?
yeah, exactly. So as Jill Townsley says from Huddersfield, my nearby Huddersfield, metaphor changes the world by changing people's perception of it. Or Emily Dickinson, tell the truth but tell it slant. I would love to hear from both of you. What are some, let's say, ecologically hale metaphors that could combat the perverted outcomes promulgated inadvertently or advertently by the tech bros and their ilk?
Okay, hang on. I haven't typed enough into ChatGPT. Give me a second.
I'll throw something in, all right? I mean, first of all, I don't agree with the initial statement, though I do agree metaphor is a form of abductive reasoning. All right, but it's only one form of abductive reasoning, and abstraction is actually more important, yeah, than metaphor. And metaphor can actually act as an attractor well, and it can stabilize meaning. You're taught this in rhetoric. The way to destroy another speaker is to create a metaphor that they can't avoid being associated with. Yeah, I've done that with appreciative inquiry practitioners by associating them with the final scene of Monty Python's Life of Brian. And you can't handle that once you get it, all right? Always look on the bright side of life. I think there's a huge amount we can learn from nature. So let me give you 3 examples which are critical, all right? But we can't do biomimicry. So it's not a metaphor, but there's things which happen in nature which we can learn from, but we have to adapt for humans because humans are not insects, as I keep explaining to colleagues in Santa Fe. So one, as I say, is bee swarming, which we've now got something out called Swarm Compass. So bees optimize search mechanisms by multiple micro interactions with no directing intelligence. Yeah, and we're now doing that. So we can present something, we can get abstract metadata back, we can iterate and iterate and iterate. We use AI for that until we have a clear consensus and we have clear outliers. Now, I can now in 2 days do what would actually take a government 6 months of citizen assemblies to find. Right? And AI is making that possible, which it didn't make possible before, but we're taking a model from nature. The other one is the classic one is that the rhizomic roots, which connect tree roots. Now, actually, what that says is informal networks are more important than formal systems in companies. So if you want to do knowledge management, build the informal networks and you forget everything else. Because if everybody is within 3 degrees of separation of everybody else, knowledge is created and flows very quickly. And it's not over-constrained and constructed. And the one we're really interested in at the moment, because I've had enough of purpose statements and mission statements to last a life, all right, is if you look at the way antelope avoid a predator. So each antelope identifies one other antelope by the markings on its bum, and that's actually important for the position. And they position themselves between the predator and that antelope. And that's how herds stay together. If they did it the other way around and they put the other antelope between them and the predator, they dissipate and the predators can pick them off, which is a fun exercise. We're looking at that is, can we get the interactions defined so that the organization can literally turn on a sixpence if something happens without having to rechange its purpose? And that's part of this whole new complexity approach to strategy, which puts risk together with strategy. It doesn't separate the two in a linear process. And it makes grand strategy and tactics simultaneously in time and perception. right? And that's where, so we've got models we can take from nature, not metaphors. Yeah. We can then say, how would they be different in human systems? And then we can start to build systems which will actually replicate that stuff at scale.
So, gosh, I can't think of. I suppose I mentioned earlier how software engineering has two aspects, development and testing. And testing is actually an engineering subject, and software development itself is more of a craft. So rather than generating a hypothesis and having a systematic way of exploring a system with small tools, which is what you do with testing, it works on ad hoc gut feel. And we like to call ourselves data driven, but most of the data we generate is beliefs which we've created from architectural diagrams, specifications, and randomly reading code. So in this world, if we're not going to turn software development into an engineering subject, you will get performance improvements from just using something which can read text better than we can. But that doesn't mean that's the pinnacle of what we can do. We haven't even started the process of turning software development into an engineering topic, where I have seen examples of people going down that path using highly contextual tools. We've seen magnitude improvements of not, tenfold, 20-fold, but 600-fold. So, the benefits you get from using large language models, even as an assistant, are a joke in comparison to turning software development into an engineering subject. But that does require people thinking about what they mean, or what the actual act of what they're doing. So I suppose my one metaphor, I don't really have a metaphor, but the one thing I would describe is AI is really good at doing the things that we do really badly. Like software development, because it's a craft, AI can do that quite well. If we turn it into an engineering subject, humans, we can improve our capability a lot more. I mean, AI is also good at doing things where correctness doesn't matter. So, particularly areas where it's all narrative based, and you can't actually. Most people don't ever bother or find a mechanism of testing it. So, a classic example for me there would be strategy itself. Most organizational strategy is based upon narrative and no understanding of the context. Many years ago, I made the joke strategy generator, which was basically a whole bunch of words randomly inserted inside another bunch of words. I made it as a joke. But the honest reality is that most strategy I see in most organizations is nothing more than a bunch of words randomly inserted in another bunch of words with little to no understanding of the context or the environment in which that organization exists. So in those sorts of cases, using an AI to write your strategy is cheaper than hiring a strategy firm. So for me, AI is really good at doing the things that we refuse to do well, and it's really good when correctness doesn't matter.
And you get some crazy stuff at the moment. I mean, we got people saying they're working on strategy and complexity theory and basing their strategy on entropy. I mean, it just indicates a level of ignorance which is quite incredible. Yeah. But it's a fun word. People just like the words.
Yeah. So that's my best. Not much of a metaphor. I'm sure somebody can tidy up or type it into ChatGPT. There we are. I've lost my ability to reason from using the tool too much.
Good stuff, Alex. Yeah.
Was that helpful at all?
Great. Okay, Caitlin.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I've typed this up in the chat earlier, but my question comes out of being a parent of young children who are, I'm in the States, by the way, in Florida. And I guess my question is kind of parenting through AI, how the education system is going to change as this process plays out. You know, are they going to want to go to college? Are they, you know, it's just a very interesting time. You know, I grew up in the 80s with cassette players, and we've gone full circle. So I would just love to hear you guys' opinions on child rearing through AI.
So my wee lad is 16. He's currently doing helicopter lessons. He's been doing so since 13. I encourage him to get outside. Of course, he spends time with his games, and of course, he spends time using AI systems. I took a whole bunch of people, professors of education, teachers. We mapped out the education sector. And from a social perspective benefit, the critical areas to focus on is critical thinking. But it's not something we teach at schools. We, in the Western world, we barely do this. I think it's really interesting that China's focus on AI is under this core competency of critical thinking. So what can you do as a parent? Well, the thing is, you can't. Unfortunately, everybody's got an expectation of using this stuff. I do like the Australia example, where they've basically said nobody under the age of 16 is allowed to use social media. I think it should be extended to AI. And personally, I would extend it to anybody under the age of 30. I think just ban it, because I'd like to see us, and I know people say it's too late, do that's all I can say is being a parent is I try to encourage them to do other activities. I try to encourage them to use the tools, but to critically think about them. One things I have noticed is there is, and so this may give you hope, is that there seems to be within the younger generation this idea, certainly within the school that I am, that people who use AI are well, they're pretty negative about it, actually. They come up with fairly derogatory terms of people using AI. I don't know if it's just the school he's going to, or whether it's something that's appeared elsewhere. But I find that almost encouraging, is that because they realize it's a source of misinformation, and it can be useful, but you have to challenge the output. You have to question the reasoning. You can't just believe it.
And I regret to say this, because I mean, I refuse to let my children go to a private school. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I go with the Finns. I ban private education, right? But I'm starting to think there's an argument for homeschooling, because the problem is public education and private education has moved over to information regurgitation. Mm. Yeah, so the idea is the AI, you get presented with information and you regurgitate the information. And I don't think you can teach critical reasoning. My favorite example of this, I think when I was at school, from the age of 11 onwards, most of my learning came from the art society, the sport, all the societies around school. Yeah, where you had more autonomy, you ran them as a young kid, you had authority. But the big thing we did is every week you walked to the front of the class, you were given a card, it gave you a motion and which side you were on, and you had to speak without preparation for 7 minutes for things you profoundly disagreed with. Mm-hmm. I did that every week from 11 to 18. Yeah, that meant I read everything. So I became the process made me a journalist, and the process made me critical. Nobody mm-hmm. taught me to be critical. Mm-hmm. And I think we're losing that in society. Human beings have created evolutionary pathways which allow capability to develop. We've got obsessed since the 1980s that everything has to be taught rather than learnt. And I think that's the key distinction.
Oh, I think that's really good. When I say we should teach critical thinking, I don't mean we sit down in a classroom and go through. I mean, it's exercises like that. It's debate. It's encouraging those sorts of behavior. So it's learning.
The Australians have done two brilliant things. I mean, they stopped doing it. They used to teach philosophy to primary school kids. Mm-hmm. And the primary schools loved it because that's the age when they want to discuss what's right or wrong. But then they abandoned that. And they also, interestingly, don't let, if you pass your driving test, you're not mm-hmm. allowed to drive with other than elderly relatives for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And you're not allowed to drive at night, and you're not allowed to drive on more than one single lane road. Mm-hmm. Now, the cognitive science backs that up. It takes a minimum of 2 years for the body and the brain to co-evolve to the point where you can drive and pay attention to a conversation at the same time. Yeah, so I think that there's things that the trouble is educational policy and government policy is not keeping up to date with science, which is going really quickly at the moment.
So, so one of the things about mapping out the education sector from different perspectives with this group of people is none of the maps made sense because we started from a principle of the main anchor of the map was the user, the students. It wasn't until one of the professors of education suggested, what if we put government and the educational establishment as the anchors, and we transformed all the maps that they did make sense. So the realization amongst this group, and it was a very painful realization, was that mostly the education system operates to benefit the educational establishment and the generation of useful economic units for government. It's not actually there to benefit students other than to turn them into useful economic units.
Yeah, but the other problem is, Simon, and we've got this with outcome-based assessment. I lost a teaching role at Kedge because the Chinese students scored me badly. Because I set an exam which said you 20% of the mark is based on proving you've read something which I didn't teach you, which for a master's program seems to me very reasonable. But they scored me. Professor Snowden demanded we be examined on something we weren't taught. So I went down below the score level and lost a teaching job. Yeah.
Right.
So basically, outcome-based targets have created perversities in education, in health, and elsewhere.
Agreed.
And you can entirely blame that on systems thinking because that's where it all came from. We manage uncertainty by defining the goal.
Right. So the answer to parental education is blame system thinkers, number one.
If in doubt,
That's
a good
good. If in
starting
doubt.
point.
No.
to encourage your children to do other activities, and three, involving them in debating societies. You can't sit down and teach them critical thinking. We're not going to teach critical thinking at schools because we're too focused on turning them into useful economic units. So you're just going to have to encourage other activities and opportunities for learning involving debate and critical thinking.
Think a 5-year-old did a winter ascent with crampons and ice axe of Ben Nevis last year.
Okay.
Kids are capable of doing far more than we realise, and we don't put them in risky positions.
Well,
and
and
lastly, hang on, number 4, if you can afford it, if you're lucky, because you've saved up money to spend on yourself to do this activity, spend it all on your kids, get them to fly helicopters. There is nothing like when they're 13 years of age, up there doing auto rotations, dropping out the sky. Because I spent 10 years saving up to learn to fly, and I took the family on a little helicopter trip. His uncle turned up. My boy was 13. His uncle turned up. There's not enough space. So I'm on the ground talking to the ground crew. And as they're coming back in, I said, what's the youngest age you can learn to fly in the UK? Thinking they'd say 21. It's 13. So when my wee boy got off the helicopter, I said, did you enjoy it? He said, loved it. I said, your first lesson's on Saturday. So I spent all the money I saved up for myself on him. And there is nothing like being in the back of a helicopter, being flown by your 15-year-old kid who's talking to air traffic control. So get them outdoors doing something.
Simon, I live in New York,
different.
and the notion of a bunch of 15-year-olds directly over my head in helicopters.
It would be fantastic. You'd love it.
That's my dream.
Yeah, that's my dream. We're living the dream now. I will say that I was speaking to a bunch of educators a couple of months ago, and they were talking about the pressure they were feeling to allow their students to use LLMs for things. And so my question was, all right, if the school as policy is going to allow the use of LLMs for things like homework and tests, who is responsible if the answer is incorrect? And they said, well, they are. And one of the teachers popped up and said, that's why they're not using it anymore.
Well,
because they discovered that if the answer that they got was incorrect and they submitted it and they were marked down for that reason, there was no point in using it.
You
That's
can't
good news.
blame, you can't blame people that you don't encourage to challenge something for not challenging something.
But we also don't trust people enough, Barbara. So we decided we don't trust teachers and we don't trust doctors. So everything has to be measured. So our headmaster also taught English. This is the days when headmasters also taught. They weren't a separate admin function. He never had a lesson plan in his life. He knew Shakespeare by heart. He got straight A's even from dumb kids because he inspired them. He wouldn't survive a modern educational system. Right. And I think that we've lost the trust in human processes and human interactions.
Okay.
Right?
I think we
And
take
we're
two
trying to
more.
control everything through measurement, and you can't measure outcomes.
Yeah.
In a complex
We have
system.
two more. First Magid and then Jocko. And
Let me jump in because it pertains to the previous question, if that's okay.
sure.
One of the things I noticed is I have a 13-year-old plays way too much gaming. He's way into gaming, so he's on all the time. That's a separate question. But one of the things that I noticed is that the way they consider AI is as what's known as an NPC, a non-player combatant, or what contestant, or
Character.
whatever. Yeah. So they consider them very, very stupid. They're almost like red shirts. And so when I asked him about AI, he's like, AI is for old people. AI is they consider it, they equate it with stupidity, dumbness, something to be killed off, and annoyance.
Really
And
confused.
yeah, it is. That's why I'm bringing it up. Is the thing is what I don't find that is with the adults and inside these companies who think that AI is the second coming, literally or figuratively, and that it's very, very useful for all that. They don't think about it as critically as the youth are. My concern is that in the schools that can extend out to the teachers as being red shirts as well. And that's kind of the problem because a lot of the teachers are embracing a lot of this stuff and trying to shove it down the throat of the people that are actually engaging with AI, who are just like, no, that's an old person thing. They have no
Part of it is
interest in it.
investment as well. So, I mean, if you look at the Blair Foundation in the UK, which is largely funded by AI companies, which is heavily pushing AI as policy and AI adoption. And I think the problem is politicians are desperate for something which will magically conjure out more results for less money. Right. And I think that's something that we need to address as a society is how do we more with less? And that's where actually the inset models come in. If you distribute decision making in smaller amounts faster, you can actually spend a lot less money, you can get better results. But we're still stuck in this systems thinking, objective setting, engineering metaphor. And the thing which went wrong in the 80s is the introduction of an engineering metaphor of government rather than the military metaphor which preceded it, because military metaphors are quite adaptive. Yeah.
I think that older people have just been traumatized by James Cameron's The Terminator and have decided that they want to be on the side of the Terminator. There we are. So they've just decided if there's going to be Skynet, we'll be its best pals. And whereas the younger generation are just not traumatized by that. And I make that as a joke, but in seriousness, back in 2022, when there was the AI Safety Institute, I think it was 2022, it might have been 23. It was quite amusing because a whole bunch of us were pushing for open source, as in truly open source AI, symbolic instructions and all this sort of stuff. And that includes the training data. And the lobbyists being led by, or being directed by those self-interested parties, mostly in Silicon Valley, were running around telling stories about how that would lead to frontier AI and Skynet and all the rest of it as well. So we had this opportunity back in 2022, 23 to create a new enlightenment based upon much more open approaches. Instead, we got what were called guardrails, which I think just handed us even more firmly over to these US vendors. So
yeah, I want to do one real quick follow-up on that. Is another reason that they hate AI is the influx of tools like, I don't know if you have them out there, but things like iReady, where a big part of their curriculum is on these tools that are being sold to the companies. And the teacher's role is simply to assign them things on iReady. Now, iReady uses a lot of AI, and they're terrible. They're awful. And the kids will tell you that they're terrible and awful, but they're being kind of introduced into so that goes back into the whole capitalistic thing a little bit. So.
what was that thought band? There was this. They were measuring brainwave activity of kids. It was an American company. They produced this sort of band you put around your head, and you put it on all your kids in the school or in your classroom. And so you have this monitor at the front, and it could identify a child who wasn't thinking hard. And then you'd go over, and then they tried to. They didn't want to tested in the US. They decided to go and test it in China and promptly got banned. Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately, this comes back to the mapping out the education sector. The focus in terms of market benefit in the education sector clearly was on using AI. So that is going to be rammed down your throats in education, that you should have AI teachers, you should use AI, you need to develop AI skills, otherwise you'll have no place in society as a useful economic unit. And sure, that's great for market benefit, but that's not what government should be doing. It should be balancing social need as well. We're not doing the critical thinking. We're not doing enough in terms of access. I suppose the only solution to that is try not to vote in a government that has been captured by the market.
But they all have been. And I mean, the other
I
part
know, that's the problem.
Adam Curtis.
Greens, go green! In the UK, go green. Sorry, anyway.
Adam Curtis did a brilliant video on this, all right, where he looked at the influence of Freudian psychology on politicians and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes the point that politicians switch from being locally based, advocating for things they believed in, and then people voted for that, to working out what people wanted them to say so that they could be voted for. And certainly when I was growing up, a politician had to handle a hostile audience in the open air for half an hour. They weren't controlled on television on sound bites. And I think that ability to know your subject and to handle an audience spontaneously is key. And if you can control the way your information is presented, that's the problem. And you can't blame the political parties for this because it became the trope, all right? It's what do the electorate want us to say? How do we say it? And that's a downhill battle. You should be saying, this is what I believe. Are you prepared to vote for it?
Mm-hmm.
And there is some evidence in young people that's what they want. You look at the Dutch elections, you look at the Welsh elections, positive messages are actually starting to play better than negative messages.
So if you're in the UK, vote green. But anyway, there we are.
Okay, I feel like I'm going to need
Green in
one of
the
those.
UK or Plaid Cymru in Wales.
Sorry, green in England, Plaid Cymru in Wales.
I think I'm going to need one of those announcements, the opinions expressed do not reflect my opinions, just so I don't have to take a lot of shit on LinkedIn. Okay. So, because it's me that they'll come after. Okay, on to Maged. Maged, please correct my pronunciation.
It's Maggot, but it's fine.
Maged, okay.
Yeah. Right. So, hi, Dave. Hi, Simon.
Hi.
I was going to ask a question about what to do with organizations that are trying to use AI transformation as the latest buzzword to compensate for longstanding structural immaturity, but I think we've moved past that. And I want to be respectful of the time, so I'm going to just basically offer two questions that you can pick one from.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is, because I'm experiencing this now a little bit, is how should we adapt organizational structure, doctrine, and decision making when AI collapses what can be described as a traditional bottlenecks in sense making, but not in the decision making. So everybody basically knows everything now, but they still are completely incapable of making any decisions. And the other one, because especially you, Dave, and I have to say you surprised me a little bit. I've recently become a father for the first time, and I'm finding it very difficult to stay optimistic on anything human or humanity related for my daughter. So, how do you manage that? Just pick one of those questions and go with it. Thank you.
Okay, so it's Catholic doctrine is to give up hope is a mortal sin. And that's worth remembering, all right? But hope doesn't require you to be optimistic, all right, which is also important. So I'd make that, right? But I think there's we are going to suffer mass heat deaths. Yeah, that's fortunately not in an area of the world where I live. We are going to suffer more catastrophic failure. Population is going to reduce. We're going to have to find ways to adjust. But we survived the plague and we survived the ice ages. So as a species, we probably survive, all right? The issue is how we survive, and that's where I get worried for my children and my grandchildren. Now for myself, I'm 71, but I worry for myself now, right? So, but I think I mean, let me be optimistic and pessimistic. The geo reengineering stuff is actually getting quite advanced at the moment. So, for example, the science of how to refreeze the poles is known. It's just an engineering problem now. That would give us another 10 years breathing space. Part of the problem is governments are focused on solving the big problem rather than changing the substrate, so the big problem is easier to solve. Yeah. But I think we'll see that switch. My worry is that people like Musk will decide to geoengineer in their own right because they think they're gods. And that's really dangerous, right? But there's ways we can do that. There's ways we'll survive. You know, it's good or bad. And I was trying to explain to my kids, you know, I've been 2 nights naked in a Stasi cell and beaten up by the police in Derry, all right? And my children have grown up in an environment where there was no violence. Yeah, and it's almost like unique generations. So, you know, human races can manage that, all right? How we manage it is another matter. The other one I think is really interesting. I think the trouble is people have believed if everybody had the same information, this was the myth of the internet, that if everybody has the same information, they would be rational. That's not the way it works.
No.
We evolved to make decisions based on minimal information. So I say, I'll go back to the bee swarm. The decision is made on highly local information by individual actors, but that means the system as a whole optimizes. So organizational design, we can now, and we've just done it with one of the big farmers, the CEO has been able to consult the entire workforce over 2 days without anybody having a chance to do political lobbying because we go through multiple micro iterations at scale and we identify dominant and micro patterns. So we are now starting to develop new tools and methods which can actually use AI but not be used by it, right? But we got to break this information centricity and this text-based centricity, the belief that it's all about everybody having the same information. It isn't. It's actually often about people having different information and the diversity producing stimulus.
If you care for that sort of thing, yes.
So I'll answer it in a different way. So start off with your I see a lot of executives who I'll start with the digital transformation space. Actually, I meet a lot of executives who believe that they will have a large language model. They can point to the legacy, press a button, and magically it will create them a new environment. Fantastic, excellent. And it's really interesting when you use swarms of agents to do that sort of thing, because yes, you can generate 60 to 80%. Roughly around that space off that transformation, off the architecture of what you want. The problem is you can't generate the other 20 to 40%, and you don't know what 20 to 40% is missing. So whenever we run these tests, we normally take a legacy environment which we've tooled up with systems enabled to describe the environment. So we've actually built tools so that we understand the environment, and then we point a large language model at it, and it gives us an answer, and we cross compare, and we find we get 60 to 80% of the result. And that may seem fantastic if you're like most organizations that you don't understand your environment. But you still don't know what the 20 to 40% is missing until you start reading the code. So you're always forced back to this path of whenever you do these transformations, you end up having to read the code. It's 30 million lines of code. It's a horrendous activity. So except for in the rare cases, I think most of these transformation efforts are going to hit that problem. And in fact, I've seen that problem. I also hear the promises that people say you're going to have a magic button you press, and I don't think that's coming anytime soon. So in terms of how do you I do have concerns about the future. And my concern with technology is more about the issues of inequality that it creates. And unfortunately, most of these technological revolutions create inequalities. I mean, we people talked about crypto, Bitcoin, as how it was going to democratize finance. 2011, I think it was, I wrote an article about the horror of Bitcoin, and part of that was how it was going to consolidate wealth. And sure, if you look at crypto, the level of inequality in things like Bitcoin far exceeds what exists in fiat. So, and actually, when you look at most technological revolutions and changes, you get huge amounts of inequality unless government steps in. And government is that balancing act between the needs of the market and exclusivity and the needs of society and inclusion. And large government, we are often very detrimental or dismissive of government action, but it was only a few years ago we had this company called Apollo Fusion in the US, and they were doing microsatellites, and they wanted to use mercury as a propellant. And if they'd done that, they would have covered the entire atmosphere in mercury, which is a really dangerous biotoxin. But for them, that's great because it was cheaper and they'd make more money. Yay! The fact that they'd cover the entire atmosphere in a biohazard wasn't their problem. Externality probably created new market opportunities to clean up shit that shouldn't be there. Fortunately, the UN stepped in and said, no, you're not allowed to kill off the planet in order to increase profitability. I think that was Apollo Fusion. I mean, it would have been really bad. So I keep coming. The thing is, we get the governments we vote in. so we need to vote in people who are going to look after people. And I think that's the problem. That's where we need to get to.
You could do one thing very simply in the electrical system, Simon, and the same is true in the States as here. You could ban anybody representing a group of people if they haven't lived there for 10 years.
Well, I'm a great believer in sortition. That would just
change politics. Yeah,
I'm a great believer in sortition. I like the ancient
I know
Greek method. The ancient Greek method was really simple. We randomly select people, and they're your politicians, and then they vote on stuff.
Socrates thought that was a really good idea.
Yeah, I know. I'm a dinosaur, so I'm all for random selection.
There's also lotocracy, right? Which is an up and coming idea that won't go anywhere. But okay, was that suitable? Yes. Are you happy with that answer? Okay. Now I know I said that was the last one, but we have one late entry. Are you up for one more?
Yeah, sure. But did we answer Maged?
He said he gave us a thumbs up. It was good.
Was that okay? Okay, fine, super.
Maged, you're good?
To be continued, yeah, but it was good.
Well, we'll see what happens. Okay, you waited till the last moment, Arya, so it better be good and it better be short.
It is a last minute question. It is unrelated to AI, but I think it's a question almost everyone in this room should have. A while ago, Dave and Simon were talking about a podcast. Is that idea still going to be realized or not?
Yeah, but Barbara was volunteered to run the first one, and this is it. So I think if it works, we're up for it. Yeah.
This is our test case. If you liked this, let me hit me up on LinkedIn and let me know what you liked or what you didn't like, and we'll go from there. But we were floating this to see how it worked. You all seem to be really engaged, so we'll work from there. All right. Thank you, Arya. That was a nice way to cap this off. Simon, Dave, thank you so much for your time. This was based on the audience reaction and the length of the chat. I'm thinking this was a big success. For those of you that are new to the Complexity Lounge, we hope you come back again soon. For those of you that have been with us for this ride all along, thank you so much. Dave, Simon, any final words before we tie this up?
No, go for it.
Okay.
I'm definitely all up for the. It's so weird not having slides as well. I like this style of chat.
I know.
I hope you had as much fun as I did. Tiani,
I did. I
anything?
really enjoyed it, but I do feel that sometimes my responses are a little bit wandery and other bits and pieces. That's just
another thing,
me.
is make people speak without slides for half an hour. If you know
Yeah.
your subject, you can do it.
Yeah.
Tiani, any final words?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Other than thank you, and I really enjoyed this. Have lots of notes and things I'd like to continue to read and chat with all of you about. It's really appreciate it.
Okay. And you
Thank
can
you for
find
inviting
you
us.
can find Dave at the Cynefin.co, right, Dave? Is that the
Yeah, and I put 2 links in the chat to the open research program we're doing next year, which people can join, and to something we've just put together to very rapidly assess attitudes to AI in organizations.
And Simon, anywhere that people can reach you.
I do have a vibe coded site. There we are.
Oh,
Called swardleymaps.com. Just for fun. In fact, there's Wrangler demo isn't working because I haven't released it yet, but I have Technomic Empire, word I cannot say. It's like a civilization game which I vibe coded together. Absolute daft. So basically, it's a site with loads of links elsewhere because there's
Well.
an entire community behind mapping. So you can find Ben's site, which is Learn Wardley Maps, and then there's Christoph's site, which is wardleymaps.com. There's loads of people out there doing interesting stuff in mapping.
Okay. On that note, thank you both so much again. I had a blast. I hope you had fun. And to the rest of you, we'll see you all next time. Bye. Watch your inboxes for the announcements. Thank you.
Yeah.